The Room at the End of the Hall, Part 2. If you haven't watched Part 1 yet, stop. Go watch it first. The link is in the description. This story only works if you've been in that room with Zoe. For those of you who have, you already know what she found on that wall. You already know about the last photograph, taken from behind her, seconds before she ran. What you don't know yet is who was in that room with her. Let's finish this. Welcome back to Untold Disturbing Stories, the channel where no story gets left half told. If you found Part 2 before Part 1, go back and start from the beginning. The link is in the description. And if you're new here, subscribe now, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell every single week. Now, let's get into what happened next. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes of Zoe's call. She walked them upstairs, down the hall, to the open door at the end. The room was empty. Not just cleared empty, bare walls, bare floor, no marks, no pins, no adhesive, no evidence that anything had ever hung there. The officers were patient with her in the way that means they didn't believe a word she was saying, but were too professional to say so directly. They walked the house, found nothing, took a statement, and left. She called Richard LaRue. He answered from what sounded like a restaurant in Lisbon, his confusion and concern sounding entirely genuine. They flew home 2 days later, tanned, tired, visibly shaken. They walked through the house with her, looked at the empty room, and Richard called it deeply disturbing and said they would contact the police themselves. They seemed, by every measure, like a couple who had returned from holiday to find their house sitter had experienced some kind of episode. She should have left it there. Every rational part of her said to leave it there. But the gap at the center of her story had never felt so close to being filled, and she couldn't stop herself from pulling at the thread. She started with what she had the LaRue name, the Constantia address, and the particular feeling of a family with something carefully buried. She searched old newspaper archives, public records, anything that had ever been printed about Richard and Catherine LaRue. What she found was exactly what their house suggested: pillars of the Constantia community, church, charity work. A profile in a local magazine from the early 90s, showing a younger Richard and Catherine in the garden of that same house, smiling, immaculate. And then, in the background of that photograph, barely visible through an upstairs window, a young woman, looking out, her expression not visible clearly enough to read, but her posture, the way she stood at that glass, communicating something that didn't belong in a magazine profile about a successful Cape Town family. Zoe stared at that background detail for a very long time. Then she searched for something she hadn't thought to search for before. LaRue, children, family. The results were thin. The LaRues had been careful, but careful people still leave traces, and one trace led to another. And 3 weeks of searching led Zoe to a death certificate filed quietly with the Western Cape Department of Home Affairs. The name on it was Elise LaRue, daughter of Richard and Catherine. Age at time of death, 20 years old. Cause of death listed simply as natural causes. We'll be right back to finish Zoe's story in just a moment. While we're here, if this story is getting to you, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love this kind of story. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. I want to know what you think is in that room. We'll be right back. It took Zoe another 2 weeks to find the doctor, an elderly man, long retired, who had treated the LaRue family privately for years. He took 4 phone calls before he agreed to speak with her, and when he finally did, he spoke quietly and carefully. The way people speak when they have carried something for a very long time and are no longer entirely sure they have the right to keep it. He told her about Elise. Elise LaRue had been 17 years old when she fell pregnant. The father was a boy from outside the LaRue social world, a teenage fling, a summer that ended badly, a young man who disappeared so completely afterward that Zoe has never been able to find a single record of him. Whether he left on his own or was helped to leave, nobody who is still alive will say. Richard and Catherine LaRue were devout, respected, the kind of family whose reputation was not a vanity, but a carefully constructed wall between themselves and a world they believed was watching and judging at all times. An unmarried teenage daughter with a pregnancy was not something that wall could survive. The baby was arranged for adoption before it was born. Private, quiet, handled through channels that no longer exist, and Elise never recovered. The doctor said she deteriorated slowly at first. Withdrawal, silence, a complete refusal to engage with the life her parents had decided she would return to. They managed it the way they managed everything privately, expensively, without involving anyone who might talk. There was no outside therapy that might have encouraged her to speak openly about what had happened. No space offered to grieve a child she was never allowed to hold. Eventually, she stopped leaving the house. And then the doctor paused here for a long time before he continued. They locked the room. Not cruelly, they would have told themselves. For her own good. To keep her safe. To manage a situation that had become unmanageable. The way people with reputations and the wrong kind of love have always managed the family members who inconvenience them. Elise stopped eating deliberately. A slow and quiet protest that no one outside those walls ever witnessed. She spoke to no one. She asked for nothing. She simply withdrew, piece by piece, from a life she could no longer find a reason to remain in. And in that room, behind that locked door, in a house in Constantia, with a perfectly maintained garden, she had died. She was 20 years old. Her daughter was 2. Zoe sat with all of this for a long time, before the final piece fell into place. The photographs on that wall had begun in a hospital, days after she was born, before her adoption was finalized, before anyone in her current life had any connection to her whatsoever. Elise would have been 17 years old. 17, and already losing the child she had never been given a choice about. Already beginning the long, quiet unraveling that would end in that locked room 3 years later. And yet somehow, in whatever way is available to someone who has nothing left, and nowhere to go, and no way to reach the person they love most in the world, Elise never stopped watching her daughter grow up. Every birthday, every school day, every road trip, every ordinary Tuesday, every moment Zoe had lived, Elise had witnessed, had collected, had kept in the only room that had ever truly belonged to her, not to frighten her or threaten her, because a mother who is given no other option will find whatever option remains. And the last photograph taken from behind Zoe, in that room, seconds before she ran, was not a warning. It was Elise finally standing in the same room as her daughter. After 26 years, close enough to touch. Richard and Catherine LaRue are old now, and they live quietly in that house in Constantia, and the room at the end of the upstairs hall has a new lock on it. Zoe has never gone back. She doesn't need to, because she understands now what that house was and what that room was, and why she slept better in those walls than she had in years. Why the house felt like company from the moment she arrived. Why the stillness felt like something quietly glad she had come. She understands why the call came from people she had never met, who couldn't name the person who recommended her, because there was no person. There was only a mother who had spent 26 years watching her daughter from a distance, and finally, in the only way left available to her, found a way to bring her home. Just once, just long enough to stand in the same room. Zoe still has the gap at the center of her story. The records are still sealed, the agency still closed, the official version of her beginning still just out of reach. But she knows, now that the blank space was never truly empty, someone was there from the very first day, watching every step, keeping every moment. And on the nights when Zoe wakes at 3 a.m. and her flat is dark and quiet, and the old familiar question surfaces the way it always has, she finds, more often than not, that it doesn't feel quite as unanswered as it used to. If this story moved you, if it got under your skin the way it got under mine, hit the like button, leave a comment. Tell me what you think was really in that room. Tell me what you think the LaRues know and aren't saying. I read every single comment. Subscribe to Untold Disturbing Stories if you haven't already. Every week, we bring you stories like this one. Disturbing, unresolved, the kind that follows you home. And if you're on TikTok or Instagram, follow us there too. Links are in the description. We post clips, extras, and stories that don't always make it to YouTube. Sleep well.